It's a beautiful Wednesday morning, and I welcome you to the program Leading Women on the Integrity Station, Splash 105.5 FM. My name is Ifeoluwapo Adeniyi. My guest is the Gender Advisor and Head of the Gender and HIV Program at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Somalia. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Ife.
So I must ask, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's nice to be in the city of Ibadan for the first time. Yeah.
It's also nice to have you here.
Thank you very much.
So how does it feel like advocating for human rights, particularly women?
It feels particularly gratifying, to work on an issue or a cause that I am passionate about. As a woman, I have had my own personal experiences that shaped my life, that shaped my perspective to life as an adult. And some of the challenges that I've had, some of the lessons that I've learned in my life provide a background, provide a wealth of perspective to the work that I do. And so I like the fact that I'm able to do something that resonates with me on a very personal level.
Well, you speak more on those personal experiences, but I want to ask you, what is the place of the woman in the Nigerian society?
The place of the Nigerian woman in the society is everywhere. Everywhere that she chooses to be. I think one of the fundamental principles underlying human rights is the question of choice. Every human being should be able to determine their own future. Every human being has a right to self-determination. And so, whatever it is that a human being believes that they are capable of doing, that they are capable of contributing to society, that gives them satisfaction, makes them feel whole and, full and fulfilled, they should be able to do. So as far as I'm concerned, wherever a Nigerian woman wants to be, insofar as she's able to make that free choice about it, whether it's in government, whether it's in industry, whether she wants to work as a business person, whether she wants to be a carer for her children at home, the choices should be available to her. She should not be forced or coerced by circumstances or by other people into a role that does not offer her personal fulfillment.
But will you admit that you've just painted the ideal picture of the Nigerian woman?
Yes, that's what I hope. I'm aspiring to, that a time will come when everyone's, aspiration is open to them as a matter of choice, and that there are no limitations, whether real or imagined, or even limitations justified by law and practices, to anybody achieving their full personal aspiration.
But does it not sadden you that almost always the Nigerian woman will not have a way?
It is the present situation now, that almost always the Nigerian woman will not have her way. I remember being project manager, gender and elections with UNIFEM at the time, 2006 to 2009 in Nigeria. And I did a lot of work with women's groups around the 2007 elections, essentially preparing women to run and win elections, preparing women to engage the process as voters, but at the same time engaging those institutions that are the gatekeepers, those institutions that are the decision makers over politics in Nigeria, to get them to also appreciate the position and the role that women could play in leadership in Nigeria. And indeed, the situation at the time was that while a good number of women are ready, the institutions were not ready to accept them. The institutions have not put in place a framework that sees women and men working side by side, contributing to Nigeria's development, women taking decisions that will affect the future of Nigeria and Nigerians. So indeed, the women do not always have their way in that respect. But then, having one's way is, a terminology that can be fraught with many interpretations. But the most important thing is that when it comes to actualizing self, desires, aspirations, and ambitions, there really should be no limitations.
So in your view now, what do you feel accounts for the highest marginalization of women in Nigeria?
There's so much. There are so many factors that account for marginalization of women in Nigeria. In fact, in 2003, I was one of 16 authors that wrote a book on women's marginalization in politics in Nigeria, using the experiences of the 2003 elections, looking at a sampling of women in those elections, women who ran for from the president to legislatures and at the federal level and at state level, women who also ran for councillorship, at the local government levels, etc. And the limitations and the challenges are many. I think at the top of the list per se were issues of resources, electioneering and, campaigning in Nigeria. The way it is run now requires a huge amount of resources. You almost have to have a bottomless bank account or something, an unending flow of resources to be able to stimulate the Nigerian electorate, as it were. And these are resources that women do not have readily available. Why? Because they are already marginalized in some other areas of life, in economic life, in decision making already, in industry, in administration, etc. And so having the resources to you have the passion, you have the intention, you have the ambition to be in political office, but the resources, for example, to move your campaign from one location to another at the most basic level, women did not have. But then we had a number of other myriad of issues, a number of issues. For example, there were challenges coming at the personal level, at the level of the family, at the level of, say, community. And then there were challenges arising from the way and character politics is run in Nigeria. There were challenges relating to the laws, for example, issues of, say, indigenship, issues of, say, identity as a married woman. And then there were those social issues like stigma attached to politics, perspectives about women in politics, and who they should be, or the dangers in politics and why women shouldn't dabble into politics. But there were so many issues. I would put resources at the top, because a number of women who had made it, successfully were able to access the resources with which they could carry their message far and convince people to stand by them in elections. The second issue I would say is that the laws. It would be very important in Nigeria to have laws that define the minimum proportion of representation of men and women. Our electoral laws have still not gotten there. We still carry on a first-past-the-post electoral system. If we had a proportional representation system, then there would be some kind of a cover for women, as it were. There would be protections for women from within their parties to be able to acquire, say, seats or positions in elected office. So there are quite a number of challenges.
Well, still talking about the challenges that the Nigerian women, and in extension, the African women will face, can we also talk about the role culture plays in all of this?
Yeah, culture is one big issue. It shouldn't be, because our cultures define our identity. Our cultures, and I use cultures advisedly because, again, we are not a homogeneous society in Nigeria. Africa is not one entity. We have hundreds of thousands of different tribes and different practices and traditions and usages that form the culture from the micro level to the bigger space, where you can say, oh, this is African culture, or this is Nigerian culture. But if you break it down, you also have the Igbo, the Yoruba, and beyond that, even minority cultures. But one of the key challenges we have with culture, and one of the key contestations about culture, is that for the most part, you find that there will always be some kind of practice in any given culture that is being interpreted in the present day to limit women. And this is an area that requires investigation, because we tend to claim our cultures have been handed down from generation to generation since time immemorial. But we need to look at what are the influences on our culture. What we say is, say, Igbo culture. Is it really Igbo culture? Has there been an influence? There are scholars who say that there have been influence of, say, colonialism on what our culture has come to be, that prior to colonialism, there was, for example, complementarity of roles between men and women. There were no hierarchies. Even if women were carers, the care sector was not subjugated to the acquisition, the roles of, say, acquiring wealth or hunting and gathering, that the roles that were played within the home were not inferior to the roles that were played outside the home. So then what is culture? We've come across, for example, cultures that say, oh, a woman cannot walk outside the house, a woman should be covered, a woman should not hold certain positions within the family, within the clan, within the community, etc. Those require investigation to actually find out, is this really our culture? Why and how? Culture is not static. Culture is dynamic. Culture changes over time. We are not slaves to culture, we are custodians of culture. If our culture is bringing us harm, per se, if our culture is not progressive, we as a people should move away from such cultures.
Well, when people talk essentially about women and liberation, like you're doing now, they are easily identified with feminism. So does the issue of female marginalization, does it not go beyond that mere identification as a feminist?
I think people misunderstand feminism. I think feminism is a good thing because you can only suppress and marginalize a people for so long. Eventually, people will ask questions. People will challenge status quo. People will assert their rights to dignity, their rights to, self-determination. People will assert all their human rights, whatever it may be, their right to equality as it may be. And so the misunderstanding of feminism as a bad word is unfortunate because feminism is good for men and women. Feminism is good for society.
But would you love to be called a feminist?
I am a feminist. I identify myself as a feminist.
What brand is your feminism?
My feminism is the feminism that believes that, and this is what feminism means to me, that ultimately every human being should be equal in terms of opportunities, should be equal in terms of, access to resources. All human beings should be taken at their own personal value and not what someone else decides or what someone else perceives should be the value of that individual. That is what my feminism is. And this feminism opens up spaces for everybody's potential to be brought to the table, male or female, man or woman. My feminism does not see limitations in a person because you have breasts and you have a womb and you can produce children. My feminism asks the question, can you do this job? If you prove yourself capable, then you will be given the job and you will be paid in equal measure for equal work done to a man doing the same job. To break it down, really, this is what my feminism is. My feminism is about ensuring that every human being is able to attain full dignity of their person. That is what feminism is about, and feminism is good.
Your feminism.
For this country. Yes.
Well, it's time to take a commercial break. I've been speaking with Victoria Nwogu, the gender advisor and the head of the Gender and HIV program at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Somalia. Please stay with us. I welcome you back from that break. The program is Leading Women on the Integrity Station, Splash 105.5 FM. My guest is Victoria Nwogu, the gender advisor and the head at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Somalia. It's a pleasure to still have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Ife.
You stay in Somalia?
Yes, I live in Somalia, in Mogadishu.
So how often do you come back home?
My contract and the situation or the guidelines, for international civil servants with the UN in Somalia is that for Mogadishu, you spend 28 days on the ground and then you take a 5-day break to go see your family. So technically, that's what it should be. I have my young children living in Nairobi in Kenya. So what I do is that I never manage to spend 28 days. I take a break. As soon as I'm done 12, 13 days, I get on a flight and go spend the weekend with my children and then come back. So what that does is that I actually never get that 5-day break, but I get to see my children as often as I want. So I actually make those rules for myself as is allowable.
Well, your family is in Kenya, and then you work in Somalia.
Yes.
You are from Nigeria. Where is home?
I tell you, I think I have written a bit of poetry about home or something like that very recently. And I'll tell you the circumstances around that. In January, I had to go to New York for 4 months. I was called to spend 4 months in our headquarters office supporting, a specific program. And given that it's New York, the distance, the cost and everything, I didn't get to see my children for 4 months. So when I came back, I came back in June and I was expected to proceed to Mogadishu immediately. What I did was to apply for, within our work-life balance policies, what is called telecommuting. So I'm still working on my job but from somewhere else. So instead of being in Mogadishu, I was in Nairobi for the entire month of June to be with my children. In fact, half of June, all of July. And coming back home, of course, we have a lot of technology now. I talk to the children on phone. I'm on WhatsApp with the bigger ones. We Skype, when they have midterm break to see their faces, but the experience is not the same. So coming home and having all of them home at the same time with me for those 6 weeks, it was so overwhelming. It was so overwhelming. And I wrote a bit of poetry about it. And it was something to do with being in that space and that time where I'm able to embrace my family, where I'm able to, sort of have the people I love around me. And so home for me sometimes could be a physical space. It could be Nigeria, it could be Kenya, but I think I'm mostly happy when I have my husband and children all together in one setting.
And that is home.
And that is home. So home is a mindset for me. Wherever it may be, it's a mindset. Yeah.
But isn't it interesting that the definition of home has moved from one's place of origin to where one finds convenient?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you first asked the question, I think I had talked about home in terms of, leaving Somalia and going back to the family, and then secondly about Nigeria, but then back to where my mind is at peace, back to where I don't feel the stresses and the strains of life, the pressures of my work, where I sort of find myself floating in something like a bubble. I'm just existing day to day, enjoying the moment and not thinking about anything. Yes, indeed, that definition is also important because it frees the person, it frees the mind, relieves you of the pressures of managing a physical time and space.
You are into women's rights, gender and development. You have also researched and published extensively on them. What really is your motivation?
My motivation, I may have mentioned it before, is really to have a different perspective, to foresee a different future from what my life was at some point, what is the status quo, to draw attention to what the challenges are, to draw attention to what the problem is, to draw attention to the current state of affairs, and together with my readers, together with the people who I have opportunity sometimes to discuss my papers with, envision a different future.
All right, let's rewind back to your life at one point, as you put it. Can you tell us the story of your mother and her struggle to raise 5 children all alone?
That's an interesting story. I've had opportunity to tell it to different audiences before, and I think that story is essentially who I am today. That whole journey, is essentially who I am. It has shaped me. It continues to shape me. I continue to reflect on it to draw strength. I reflect on it to draw encouragement for the journeys ahead. My mother is a phenomenal woman, and everybody says that of their mother, and they are rightly entitled to do that. And so I am entitled as well to say my mother is phenomenal. My father died 27 years ago. 27 years ago, I was a teenager at the time, and it wasn't immediately obvious how our life had changed, but the reality set in. Within a few years, it became very clear that we had lost not only the man physically, but everything he meant to us in terms of economic security, social security, emotional support. We had lost quite a lot. And so my mother in her 30s at the time also had to bear up, and carry this family on her own, something she'd never done before. And it was quite an interesting and a challenging journey. On the one hand was surviving day to day, daily bread, school fees to get paid, clothes to wear, things like that. On the other hand was also fighting to retain my father's material legacy through a culture that supposedly believes women cannot fend for themselves, or a culture hiding behind this kind of belief to disinherit women. And so we had quite a long history of battles back and forth through the system with relatives, male relatives, who felt that because my father was larger than life, he was that kind of person, who felt that now that he had vacated the space, they could take over and take what we were entitled to. And so it was within that whole experience that I saw my mother as a fighter. She fought and fought and fought. She would use tradition, she would go to the laws, she would approach the church. We were constantly on the road. And I would see her standing up and not backing down. I would see her stand and declare what she knew was hers. She would recite the traditions back at the people and try to circumvent it, or try to show how we're well within our rights to have her manage my father's properties and things like that. And that image of her in me, I saw her struggle and build up a school from scratch, from nothing, build a private school from which some of our resource needs, were met. So economic issues were no longer that challenging. And I also experienced her teaching us the value of hard work, the value of being accountable, the value of integrity. These were the things I learned going to work for my mother at the age of 16. And she never gave me a room to escape some of the things she required of her staff to do. So because I was her daughter, I couldn't get away with things. I had to, we worked in her school, we were teaching. I had to turn in my lesson plan on time, first thing Monday morning, get it reviewed and get a sound criticism if I hadn't done it well, and asked to do it over. She would go around and inspect teachers in the classroom. She didn't bypass the class in which I was teaching. She would come to me, check on what I was doing, give feedback. I had to be on time at school, in assembly, first thing in the morning, like every other person. And so the work ethics that I learned from her back then have carried me. I tell people, I say, I find my work sometimes to be so easy now, because I worked really hard in my teenage from about 16 to 23. Teaching in my mother's school was not a day job, it was full time. And at the end of the day, there were mechanisms through which she motivated us. And so she realized that, yes, as my mother, our mother, we were entitled to, say, pocket money to go back to school. But if you didn't work in her school, you only got your pocket money.
And nothing else.
If you worked for her, you got a salary in addition to your pocket money, and that was just awesome, because then you had so much more, resources at your disposal as an undergraduate in the university. So I tend to sort of split my life into two eras, before my father died and after my father died. And those experiences really shaped who I am, today.
But of course, those experiences must have also helped you.
Oh yes, they helped.
And they didn't bring you down, because at age 22, you had already backed your LLB in law.
Oh yes, they didn't bring me down. Certainly, they made me so much stronger. We were sort of, my father had a lot of focus on education. In my village, he was the very first engineer. He gained his engineering degree in the early 70s. And so if you go to my village now and you mention engineer, you would likely end up in my father's house. That's the way it was back then. And so he placed a very high premium on education and had us like well on our way, but also reinforced this to my mom somehow before he died. He died suddenly at the age of 47. He never anticipated he was going to die. But the key principles which he lived by, he had imparted to us several times. So we were well aware that education was key. He would talk to us, and say, it is my ambition that all my children will be graduates by the age of 20. He kept saying by the age of 20, that was his threshold. And we're well on our way to actually be those graduates he wanted by the age of 20. I finished law at the age of 22 because of what happened to the Nigerian educational system. I was one of those that was sitting at home because the academic staff union was on strike for 14 months at some point. So indeed those were in place, but all the challenges that came after made me so much stronger. They gave me a different perspective.
But are you aware of a Supreme Court verdict recently where inheritance rights for women in Igbo land was upheld?
Yes, I do. In fact, in that particular decision, of course, the Supreme Court upheld, the fact that women could, the inheritance rights in that particular case. It was not a sweeping pronouncement on women's rights in Igbo land, because for every case that comes before the courts, they are judged on the merits. Okay, so on the merits of UKJ, versus UKJ, the decision was upheld that the daughter could inherit, property belonging to the father. However, it sets a precedent, because where a similar case comes up before the Supreme Court with similar facts, behind them, a similar decision would be reached. And this is the strength of UKJ versus UKJ, because then people who are, for example, contesting, over family land or over, personal property, can actually use this case as a precedent. But it is also interesting to note that in certain cultures, my mother, when she had those challenges, with securing my father's personal property, actually faced the threat of ostracism by the community if she took the matter to court. So there is an unspoken rule. Most of customary law is unwritten. And there is that unspoken rule that if you walk away from resolving issues at the community level, the traditional way, you will face, sanctions from the community. And so my mother had those moments when she was really frustrated and had considered going to court. I myself was in university at the time. Being in 300, 400 level law, I was learning things that were making me so excited, and I was giving her ideas. Do you know we can take this to court? We can go to court and challenge this, etc. And she would, share these ideas with all the members of the community, senior uncles, and the feedback is that you wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare. Because the African system, as varied as they are, the African system of conflict resolution is more conciliatory. It's more conciliatory. The objective, ultimately, or the objective in principle, is to foster and improve cohesion, to make the community function better together as one. The legal system, or the secular legal system, is a bit more adversarial. It is winner or loser. One person wins and one person loses. And it is not necessarily the business of the court to reconcile them. And so communities where a member challenges some culture or some tradition in the courts will be slighted, feeling that this process alienates members of the community or creates strife or conflict, etc. So I would say there is some justification in there, for that kind of attitude. However, human rights remain human rights. And the systems, our traditional systems, should be brought up to the level where they also promote and protect rights. I have studied the work of an NGO in Kenya that actually moves away from helping women to go to the formal courts to seek justice, but rather works from within the traditional justice system, working with the elders, working with the community leaders, actually sensitizing them on rights, sensitizing them on the benefits of, helping each member of the community to achieve equality, sensitizing them on some of the dangers or the challenges of disinheriting women. And gradually, they come to the point where they are able to actually resolve, property disputes in favor of women, where they are able to say, hold on, this woman is an enterprising person, this woman is an individual, this woman is an adult, she's well able to take care of her children, or she needs these resources to make those decisions on her own, and actually come to a resolution without the matter going to court. So yes, the court when all else fails, or yes, the court when there is no hope of resolution. But ultimately, our systems are also set up in a way that taking matters to court is seen as a slight. So we have to walk around the system. Regardless of all the modernization we have around us, we're still a very traditional people. We respect our traditions, and rightly so too. But there has to be a meeting ground between culture or traditions and human rights.
Well, it's time to take a commercial break. The program is Leading Women on the Integrity Station, Splash 105.5 FM. And I've been speaking with Victoria Nwogu, the Gender Advisor, United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Somalia. Please stay with us. Yes, I welcome you back from that break. The program is Leading Women on Splash 105.5 FM, and I still have with me Victoria Nwogu, the Gender Advisor, United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Somalia. Victoria, in an interview you granted once, you confessed that your secret passion is to be the first United Nations Secretary General. What are your goals, or rather, what are the goals you have in mind to aspire for that position?
If I may rephrase, in that interview I said I want to be the first or the next woman UN Secretary General. And I say it with every sense of conviction because I believe women should aspire to high office. I worked and still work for a number of years, with women. And the starting point is ambition. The starting point is expressing that desire for leadership. You can put all the structures in place. And if you do not have women who come forward and say, I am a leader, I can do this, you will actually not have women, fill the positions. We have countries who have established quotas. They are not meeting the quotas because there is a bit of a gap in terms of women. We've had advocacy to institutions, and they say, well, we would put women in office if only we found the women. So that statement I made was a message. And it was a message on two fronts. One is, I, Victoria, believe I can achieve anything. It's what has sort of brought me this far, my faith in God, and that through Him I can achieve anything. And so whatever I set my eyes on, I can achieve it. Number one, that's the first message. But secondly is the fact that we need women to aspire to the highest offices in the land. It's your entitlement. It's no crime. And when you make those aspirations and you begin to walk towards it, you begin to experience what the limitations or the challenges are. And it may be that you may not achieve that office, but with the right amount of passion, you may begin to chip away at the obstacles.
But are you willing to play even the politics of the United Nations?
My dear, politics is life. There is no aspect of life that is not fraught with politics. Day-to-day interactions, even between couples in the family, also have its own politics, as the case may be. And so, yes, I do know that achieving that position is a political process, but it's a bridge we'll cross when we get there.
All right, Victoria, you're a visiting professor at the Legal Studies Department of the Central European University, Budapest in Hungary.
Yes.
You also have this demanding United Nations job.
Yes, I do.
So how have you coped with family demands?
I was once asked in my office, to talk about professional development and balancing personal life, etc. And I say, I see my existence and, the little achievements I've made and balancing it all as a function of grace. I see 90% of my achievements, or 90% as who I am, as a function of grace. 5% grit and 5% guts. That's the way I define it. But if you look at it, it also takes grace to have guts. It also takes grace to put in the grit that is needed to achieve success in any endeavor. Yeah, how do you do it all? I'm a Christian. I believe I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Sometimes when I get overwhelmed by demanding responsibilities, work, family, I pray. I pray and I just do it. I don't think. If I think about it and plan it too much, I get overwhelmed. So I pray and I think about, and I just let it go and let God. You remember you asked how much time do I spend in Somalia, etc. I can't sit in Somalia for 28 days. I can't. And so I looked through the procedures and I found out, well, if I can get on a UN flight back to Nairobi on Thursday, my weekend is my weekend. We work Sunday to Thursdays. So by Thursday afternoon, in the middle of 28 days, I get on a flight back to Nairobi and I see my children and I come back. And then, we underestimate the strength of women. We underestimate our own strengths. Women, the whole caring and reproductive functions that women do, they are the glue that holds society together. I'm sorry, but I find that most men just can't do it. A man can sit in an office and boss people around and, go out on an oil rig and be an engineer. But he can't warm a bottle and give it to a baby. He can't change a nappy, he will run away. Most men are like that. And so women hold everything together. We don't give ourselves enough credit for what we contribute to society, both on the caring level and as professionals. We are so able as women to combine a professional life and family life. Most men, their family life interaction is anchored on what the foundation the woman has already laid. They are simply present. So I think these are just it. I don't know how I do it, but I just do it.
Now to tease out this interview, what is your most significant impact on a personal level?
On myself or on other people?
On yourself.
The most significant impact that my work has had on my life is just coming to the understanding, even as an adult, that I'm here. I occupy this space and this time and the functions that I do because it was meant to be. I've had those moments of existential crisis. Who am I? What am I? What am I doing here? Am I contributing? Should I be here? But over time, with the experiences I've had, from one place to the other, from Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, all over the place, I've come to realize that I'm here because I'm doing what only I, Victoria, can do. When I vacate this place, someone else will do it. But for here and for now, I have an assignment, and it is a divine assignment. And if I didn't do it, someone else would do it. And so that gives me the confidence. Another impact my work has had on my life is, like I sort of measure my life in terms of 2 time frames, when my father was here and the time after he left. And there was really so much packed into the past 27 years, of my father not being there. And those 27 years, those experiences, some up, some down, some challenges, some victories, etc., I've come to know more, understand more about, those challenges and how I can help other people, how I can help other young women, and especially women, to overcome similar, if not the same challenges.
Well, thank you for your time, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Ife. Thank you.
Well, my guest on the program has been the Gender Advisor and Head of the Gender and HIV Program at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Somalia, Victoria Nwogu. For comment about this program, you can send your bills to ayadeniyi@splashfm1055.com. ayadeniyi@splashfm1055.com. For text messages, the number is 0705 439 3302. 0705 439 3302. The sound engineer is Blessed Akum, and my name is Efeoluwapo Adeniyi. Good day and thank you.